Thank you for coming to our talk today with Ivar Zeile. So Ivar is the guest curator for this exhibition of C. Jean's work. Ivar and C have known each other for a long time, so it was really a privilege to get to work alongside both of them and learn more about C's work, especially from Ivar, who has such a deep knowledge of the work C has been making throughout his career and kind of where this work has come out of. But I'm going to hand it over to Ivar since you know more about yourself, you know more about this work, and I don't want, no one's here to hear me talk.
Sure.
Thank you so much, Ivar.
Well, thanks, Lydia. I really love this opportunity to speak about C's work, and particularly in this context. And you know, being asked to curate this exhibition sort of came out of the blue for me. We knew that C was on the books for having an exhibition here at Goka for the last couple of years at least, and with Daisy's departure and being asked to fill those shoes, I was like, wow, I didn't know what to say other than absolutely, because I come from the gallery world where the size of my space could fit into that zone just right into those like 6 squares right there. And when you work with somebody like C over the years, for me, the joy of being in this profession at all is working with artists long term and getting to see that development. So I knew that several years ago, I want to say it was around 2014, 2015, C departed Denver, and his whole career really was based in Colorado. He was considered one of the top artists, by far one of the top contemporary artists in the area. And when he left Colorado, it just felt like there was this giant hole in the scene. And part of that was C's, obviously his natural abilities, but also his humanistic characters. I don't know a single person that's met C and not just fully embraced him as a human being. And that's something that I've always revered about him, besides just the work. But as he moved to Milwaukee, which a lot of people thought, why are you going to Milwaukee? Seemed like a crazy choice, but it's a very nice story because he met Kate, his wife, who they got married in my gallery space years ago before moving to Milwaukee. And he moved there largely so that she could study, get her MFA, and I want to say he spent about 3 years there. And I don't know if it was the right moment for him to shift into this new direction, this new body of work. It certainly made sense, or whether it was some sort of culture shock. Things really have changed a lot since then, but basically upon moving to Milwaukee, he started what is called the Metallic Leaf Garden series. And C's always been great at coming up with these very imaginative names. I think his last major exhibition, not quite to this scale, but in an institutional space in Park City at the Kimmel Art Center, was called Dream Dust Milkshake. And that's something where a lot of what I love about C is this brilliant imagination that flourishes in all ways. But it was when he started doing the Metallic Leaf Garden series, what I noticed was this really strong departure from the type of work that he had been doing previously. And previous to that, those that do know his work would notice that he always had this penchant for what could be considered figurative work, or in a lot of cases just human faces, but also human faces that are masked in ways that I think were very compelling, obviously symbolically rich, and just really engaging for everybody's sensibilities. And I think he explored that through several bodies of work that were very, very successful, very well respected and collected down in Denver. And all of a sudden, he started shifting with Metallic Leaf Garden into something, I think, completely different. It started to me, what I noticed was, is there some sort of narrative quality going on within these works? It certainly seemed as if that was emerging, and certainly looking at a broader idea of landscapes, interweaving abstraction into the work in a much more progressive way. And then just also the gestural work with the paint application was really phenomenal. And it took me a little while to sort of come to grips with everything and say, what are the indicators of where this was happening originally? So one of the middle exhibitions that he did with me down in Plus Gallery was called 11 Ceremonies. And in that exhibition, there was one painting that it was just explosive as an abstract painting, yet it looked like it was approaching, like trying to represent something you just didn't, couldn't put your finger on it, but it really was like this wonderful explosion. And that abstraction really interlaced throughout the rest of the works in that exhibition, which were all, figurative works that I think were telling some sort of story. And at that time, C was really gravitating towards technology in a way that I think makes sense to everybody back then. That, it's not like artists were directly Googling everything to come up with, the research concepts and things that they can rip off. But for C, it made a lot of sense as somebody who came from China originally and didn't have like this direct connection to his homeland except through technology, and that technology was continually changing. And to see, to watch C work with it and how he wove that into his paintings, I thought was really fascinating. So it was a direct break for him to stop doing that with the Metallic Leaf Garden series and sort of jump into this, what I call the deep end of something extraordinary that flies somewhat in the face of, I think, what he had been doing originally. And that kind of leads to, getting around to this exhibition and the opportunity for it and saying, well, there's so many things that I can say that are meaningful to me about bringing this here to Goka in a space like this. The first is that the scale of C's works right now, this is typical. I would say maybe 95% of his works currently are at this scale, and that defied quite a bit of what he had done previously. Prior to that, he never really had what I would say a typical scale to his works, but all of a sudden he was shifting up to this large format and changing the approach to his painting. And it took a little while, I think, for the market to understand it. It took a little while for me to understand it. And as the body of work started to grow, I think it really unfolded in a spectacular way. Now, what C had been doing at that time, and we'll get a little bit more into this in the Rogues Gallery, because I want to take everybody in there. It's essential to understanding the development and how I put the show together. But C's very prolific as a painter, and he was labeling his works according to the series number and the episode number. So let's say the first work in Metallic Leaf Garden was MLG SO1 E01. And as it evolved, you would all of a sudden see the shift to another series with new episodes. And sometimes you could understand where the break was within how he was categorizing those. And I thought, at the time that seemed very smart, seemed like a very artist thing to do. He continued with that, I think, for a little while, but then eventually dropped that. And I also thought that was a very, very smart and artistic approach to your career, because these works, to me, they've reached a point right now where they really stand on their own, yet having the opportunity to put together a collection of them from such an expansive body of work, it was no easy feat for me, and certainly something that really was a new opportunity for myself at the time that I was asked to do this, even though I'd worked with Steve for a long time. So in putting this together, there were some interesting curatorial challenges. The first was looking at this space and saying, wow, this is a huge space. It's a space that commands the right scale for the format of these works, and that's where the excitement for me really kicked in. Everybody knows that the last few years, probably for artists, have been really difficult. The future for artists, I think, is going to be very challenging too, where, you know, back when I started the gallery, the opportunity to exhibit artists' work just seemed very natural. The scene seemed explosive. There seemed to be all sorts of dynamics to having a space and showing your work in a space. Once social media evolved, once everybody started living online, you can look at images on a computer, you can look at them, most people look at them on a phone, and you see something in a totally different way. And you know, all artists have to embrace that to a certain extent within their practice. And for C, I think that paid off a lot, because people see, you know, they see these paintings and they can see the richness in them. They can see what he's getting after within the compositions and how he's evolving as an artist. But you really can't understand these works effectively or approach them in the right way without having a space to view them in. And so getting into Goka and seeing this opportunity, for me, it was just a real revelation. I think for C too. I know that maybe during his lecture on the night of the opening, he might have mentioned that as an artist doing works at this scale, you don't really have the ability to step back and see them in a proper volume and start to understand them. So I think we knew going into this that this was going to be something very special, to be able to emphasize that and really draw that out from an extraordinary body of work. I do know that the last major exhibition that C had that would be, you know, akin to this, which was at the Kimball Arts Center, a nice venue, but not a voluminous venue. And that exhibition was slated to open in early 2020. And of course, I remember they installed the show, excuse me, the pandemic struck. All of a sudden, you don't really know what to do with that. It was impossible to have people engage with the works in the appropriate way. And I also didn't really know what to do at that time within the context of contemporary art, other than to, you know, look at things online. And I think my first inclination was to say, okay, well, we're going to take those works, we're going to digitize them and put them into a gallery setting. I've got great images from my old gallery space, so we'll show how they might operate in a functional way within a great space. But I quickly lost interest in that because everything was switching, all the norms were changing, and it was really difficult to understand how people were going to interact with art. So the good thing about C as an artist is that he's never really done anything in his career that is in step with what artists generally are thought to do, other than, you know, making art. They're thought to make art. But what I've always said about C from the get-go is that he's just a very fearless artist. He's somebody that doesn't want to latch on to trends. And I wouldn't say he necessarily wants to create his own trends. He's just creating work that is vibrant, new, and something that really pulls people in always. So I think from a standpoint not really being able to speak for him, his only issue during the pandemic was actually having time to work as much as he would like to work. He told me before leaving Denver that, you know, sometimes he would feel physically sick if he wasn't in the studio painting for long stretches at a time. And, you know, that's a hard thing to, like, sort of go, really? You know, is that serious? But you know, I've always looked at what I consider to be quote unquote relevant artists, and they're people that aren't put on this earth because they want to be artists. They're put on this earth because they are artists, and that's what I've always felt about Steve through watching the evolution of his work and leading up to this point in time. So I do want to ask everybody to get up and shift to the next space, the Rose Gallery. We'll come back here and visit some of these, but the challenge of getting into this space was twofold. You have this wonderful voluminous space to work in, and then you have this backspace, which is actually a sizable gallery, and something that you know, I thought, well, we don't really want to do the same thing in this space as what we're doing in the rest of the space. So let's you know, consider some opportunities that maybe are to be had. And what I love about this, and I'll talk about the title of both shows after we kind of move through the space. I think that this part of the exhibition is something that grounds and really informs what's happening with the large paintings. If we look over here and at this wall, composing the walls was also something that I had really, really great fun with, because this particular body of work here, the gold leaf paintings, started back in 2010, 2011. I brought some of the early ones from my own collection, and I think the best way to understand that evolution and even just how C thinks, like this is the very first one. He had these boards sent straight from China and started doing works on them that to me were unclassifiable gems. I mean, there's really nothing like it that I had seen before. And the first one starts with simple calligraphic figures that to me represent C's history in a way that some people knew, not everybody understood, but C's father happens to be one of the top calligraphers in all of China. And that's like one of the most esteemed traditional artistic professions that you can have in that country. So C comes from a background and origins where this is really the root of that civilization and the artistic traditions. So for him to start with that, and then as he evolves, I was really drawn to this because it's sort of like taking those same notations and extrapolating them into something that I think speaks to what most of us see around us in society, tagging, this idea of graffiti, and how pervasive that is, and how it really just takes human language and distorts it, and really turns it into symbols. So for me, that was a nice evolution. And then all of a sudden, he started weaving in what I would call his Google research. And if you were out in the exhibition and looking at these works and saying, do these come across as serious? Do they come across as humorous? What are you gleaning from this? Most people would look at C's major works over time and see them as something very serious, very dramatic. And they may not recognize that C is actually an extremely funny person. And he's very much rooted in this sensibility of how humor, or how you can play on ideas in a way that can bring out humor, but also do it through something that's a very impressive composition. So when he started making these, it was like, okay, what is up with the figures holding the phones, taking the selfies? He really explored this in depth in a way that I think if we had just this body of work, it could have filled the whole gallery space back here. But these are the only ones that are really left from that series, and it's a nice way to start to understand just C's experimental nature and how he does approach things in a multiverse way, I want to say. But I've always felt like what these also express is just his extreme ability to create detailed work. And I've worked with a lot of artists. I've worked with some of the best realist artists in the world. I go, there's fine detail, but what about an artist that really takes that and moves it around in different ways that I think are captivating, broad, go in directions that you would never really begin to understand the true nature of. So with the space back here, I wanted to show some representation of that. And those also started emerging at the same time that this body of work began. And this again was back in 2010, 2011. I don't think C ever approached either of these opportunities necessarily as something that, hey, I'm going to create a massive body of work and release it to the world. It was a slow build where the first drawing that he did from the Yellow Machine series was included in our introductory exhibition with C in 2010. And I looked at it and I said, oh my gosh, like this is just fascinating as a work on paper and a one-off. I thought it was brilliant. Christoph Heinrich, the then new director at the Denver Art Museum, picked that work up immediately. I was like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? That's really, really telling of something. But as he kept creating these, people kept, collecting them. And so finally he set out and did, I want to say it's a series of 10 of these drawings that, to me, speak to who C is as a human being. The reference to technology, the reference to Chinese culture, pop culture. There's just so many expressions going on within them that make them fascinating, but also show just his ability to really weave his skills in different ways. And if you look at these sections within the drawings here, these are all very reminiscent of his paintings when he was just a teenager. When I first saw his works, I was like, yeah, that looks like teenage work on steroids. It really, really was something super impressive, super detailed, but not really able to assimilate, the figurative much more than through mark making, which I think he has an extraordinary gift for. So these were something that, for me, having an opportunity to bring them forward was really nice. People had seen those in different contexts. But it was these works here that nobody had seen, and these were works that C executed really at the very start of the Metallic Leaf Garden series. So nobody's seen them, certainly in exhibition context. I've had them sitting in a file for years now. And I want to thank Lene for fighting for this opportunity. To show works on paper is not easy for an artist at all. The framing costs, everything. It's something that to do it right or to not do it at all, that's usually the choice. And artists have always found ways to show them. But C's never really said, oh yeah, this is what my work is about. This is a practice that I think shows the side of C that is truly experimental, and the way he was working with faces and the different, you can see the two different, or the shift in the two different bodies of work here from one technique to another. I find them both riveting. And then he ultimately moved to this expression over here that I think is the leaping off point into Metallic Leaf Garden, where you're no longer concerned with detail. You're starting to look at this more fast gestural approach to the figure in the face. And when I first saw these, I was just shocked by them because I felt that they were so good. And that's just handling them, looking at them close up. So again, being able to put something like this together that shows the pathway of a practice within C's work that he always used to call his funny side the B-sides, because he always said, well, musicians have their albums and then they put out a single, and on the B-side they have something that nobody really cares about or wants. And I'm like, no, C, the B-side is on his end is really, really exquisite, as it should be. So being able to present this and also present works by C that are at a scale that is dramatically different from the paintings, I saw as a real opportunity and hopefully something that enhances the exhibition in a way that I didn't, would never have thought of originally when Dave and I had first talked about the show. So let's go back into the main space. I want to talk a little bit about how the title of the show came about, because not only was being offered the opportunity to curate an exhibition in such a large space a gift for myself, one of the biggest challenges was being handed all of the tasks of doing this, which, you know, it didn't stop me in my tracks at all. It just made my head spin and go, wow, I am so thankful to be able to have this opportunity. I had written about C before. Back when I had my physical space, digital publishing became a thing, and I was all about it in ways that I felt you could enhance an artist's career by putting together catalogs, putting together, you know, things that capture periods within your career. And it's not an easy thing to do, particularly as a small operation, but C was, you know, certainly one of the artists that I felt most able for me to embrace in presenting this rich history. So there are publications that you can see, a lot of the early development, very different from this, but getting into this space and being tasked with not just putting the works together, but I was also asked to come up with the exhibition theme or title. And that's, you know, I don't know that I've ever done that, maybe in nearly 20 years of being in the business. And so that was probably the most daunting task for me, was saying, well, okay, what I'm not the artist. Like, what am I trying to say with this? How am I going to say something that the artist is going to be happy with? That was certainly a new challenge. I think my approach to doing a lot of things is just to spitball and throw everything down on paper that you can. The title that was closest to something even remotely sensible was like Liquid Oblivion, which I look back on and go, no, that's ridiculous. It's like a dumb art title. And so what happened was, you know, C presented what he thought would be a direction for the show. I think he presented this to Daisy originally and said, okay, these are the paintings that I think, you know, have a good coherence that can make up an exhibition in the space. And I looked at that and I said, yeah, you know, let's move this here, let's, you know, arrange things around. And then I got to talking to C one day via Skype or Zoom, whatever, and always talking with C opens up a lot of pathways and light bulbs in the head. And that's where I started to kind of not only shift some of the works, even like dipping in and saying, well, can we, you know, bring this in? Because this is kind of what I want to do. And where I landed on Exit Childtown, this is going to sound really strange. I don't know if anybody is familiar with the filmmaker Lars von Trier, but he released the third segment of the Kingdom TV series, which he did way long ago, one of the first to actually pioneer, you know, episodic television at a high level. And they released this on Movie, I think in December, and I was watching it. And in one of the last episodes, they're in this the setting is a hospital, and just randomly on the wall in a scene, very not noticeable, was just the word Childtown. And what I loved about that, I was like, Childtown, that makes so much sense to me, because here's a very serious director who has innately humorous sensibilities that nobody really understands or often misrepresented in different various ways. And how can I utilize that? Because I think the term was something that I was able to really grasp onto after my conversation with C, and really thinking about the paintings and really thinking about how, you know, what he had to say about color and the richness of color, the boldness of color, which is something that children gravitate towards, you know, much more than adults, but is something that's very motivating for him. And if there's one thing, you know, to me that really made me want to bring this work forward, it is that richness in color. It's the richness in composition. It's how C is one of those few artists that I think, particularly in this region, that's able to bring bring so much color in and make it cohere in a way that I think is not a natural gift for an artist. And that's something that I would say about his work over time, but really it kind of brings everything into a more fullness within an assortment of paintings such as this. So the Child Town really was just like this simple reference to C's exclamation of you know his you know how art and painting influenced him as a child, and then adding the exit to the title for me personally became something that has some duality to it that I think is really interesting. Is it what is the exit? Is it you're exiting something? You know, for me, is it leaving childhood? Is it the childhood is an exit that everybody has to reach at a certain time? I felt like it really captured the context that I was after, and also this moment in time within C's history, because for most of his time in Colorado, he kind of came across as this glorious kid who everybody loved. I mean, he still is, but he's not within this context anymore. And for me, there's this idea of having to leave that behind, and the Metallic Leaf Garden series, in a way, it stands for stepping into a void, stepping into something that defies logic, defies childhood, defies development, not defies development, but maybe defies how other people perceive of your work. And that's something that I've had to grapple with seeing in you know the series and his work over time. So I felt that was going to be the title. I passed it along to C, and fortunately got his blessing, which you know. I don't know if C, you know, sat there and said, "Oh God, is Ivar crazy? Why does he want?" Oh, of course, Ivar, go for it. But he, you know, C's a very agreeable character in a lot of ways, and I always have to thank him for emphasizing my curatorial abilities, because as a curator, you know, particularly from a gallery context, you don't get, you know, that much notice outside of being able to have opportunities such as this. So. The last thing I kind of want to say about this, oh, and then the Rogues Gallery, sorry. So after coming up with Exit Childtown and then having this small auxiliary space and knowing what I wanted to do with it, and I also kept coming up with ideas for like, oh, this is the off-ramp, or should it be the on-ramp, or, you know, silly things like that. And then all of a sudden that light bulb went off with Rogues Gallery, and I think it first started as a term that to me, I want to say associates with not like Marvel, but like comic book history and lore, where that Rogues Gallery is like a police lineup or something that, you know, the bad guys. And so I had to dig in a little bit to see the historic concept of it. The definition that I came up with, which is in the publication accompanying the show, it said that it was like the first known representation of the term Rogues Gallery, and it had a direct relationship to children. So I thought, oh, I don't know that most people are going to get that necessarily from this, but to me it became another really nice way just to enrich how a title can enhance a show, and, you know, be something also that maybe allows people to contemplate a little deeper. And obviously, just the emphasis on the faces, I think alludes to that as well. So, within putting this collection together, I don't want to speak too much about the layout of the show, because I like to think that it's fairly obvious the coherence within these works, and there's this opportunity, you know, that I saw within how the space is configured to say, okay, well, you're going to, you know, have somewhat of a departure over here. So this is, you know, really something that to me grounds the concepts that C's been dealing with over the last few years. And, you know, C probably spoke about it within his artist talk at the opening. The way he relates it to me is, you know, every day I'm taking public transportation and I look at the people around me and see all sorts of things. And, you know, I love that because he's a very humble person. He's never learned to drive a car as far as I know. He doesn't drive. He's a full tenured professor at the University of Utah, takes a commute to school every day. And just this idea, I think he's been working with imagery that appears as if the figures are an enclosed space, whether it's a cab car or something else, has never necessarily been easy to rectify. But I think within this context, you can see that there's a direct sense of being in a subway, being in a line for tickets, the tethering of the people together, and just the common person that C is seeing on the streets all the time. And you know, how does that fly into the reality of others in our society? Ghost Town to me, you know, really is an extraordinary work of art that makes a statement about society. Not, you know, maybe not just right now, but more so now than ever. Dipping into figures, absorbed in technology, not really able to see anything outside of that, while the rest of the world is tethered to these other systems. I found it to be very fascinating. I find that his exploration within that context is riveting. There are things about the works that I certainly didn't understand until C started speaking, to me directly about them, and that made it all the more exceptional for me to sort of say, well, my way of looking at this is from a cohesive standpoint, but it's also from a pacing standpoint that can relate to composition and color. And that's kind of the fun part of curating an exhibition and putting it together, particularly in a space like this. So hopefully there's some sensibility of that. There were minor elements like, if you look at these two paintings here, they may not seem to be of the same nature, but I really love the nails or tacks or whatever those are. They're going through the hands, and that become they become a symbolic element that I actually didn't notice originally looking at the images. Just sort of the way you can see something on a monitor, and you look at the composition and you get the emphasis of it, but then you start to look at the detail further, and you see things that appear that I think really become exquisite, and that's something that I also wanted to try to emphasize within putting this work together. So as we shift over to this section, there was this opportunity, I think, to look at the duality of Childtown and what that can represent from the more serious side. The way I sort of think about it is, what is the difference between an adult and a child, particularly in this day and age when a lot of adults act more mature than anybody? How does anybody grapple with that? Life is serious business, but it's also full of these challenges that, as he claims with his wonderful reference of Charlie Chaplin, you just have to laugh at your situation sometimes. And I think his ability to frame that in different ways is really apt. But within this portion, it was sort of like, okay, I think maybe I looked at Zootopia and said, God, I love this painting. It's so weird. It's such an oddball painting, but it has this childish theme or feel to it. And, I personally felt like we didn't want to have all large-scale canvases all the same. There's an opportunity here to mix it up a little bit. And there were also paintings that I think didn't necessarily fit into the coherence on this side. That there was an opportunity to present, such as Goose Goose Duck, one of my absolute favorites. And so the evolution of that was trying to look at some of his works in a different way and see if they can position themselves together and hopefully, have people make sense of that as well. So, so I could go on and on. I don't know that I need to. I don't know that I want to. I would love to hear anybody else's questions or perspective. I'd love to answer anything that anybody has to offer.
I have a couple of questions. In the Rogues Gallery, even where we have the facial representations where the features are almost unrecognizable, the lines are still very precise, and I mean, his attention to precise detail is amazing. And yet, in here, the features are not so precise, and in many of them, they remind me of what I see on the back of a digital camera if I open the lens way up. And all of a sudden, you just see splashes of white and dark, and especially like those figures there, it's just splashes of yellow and gray. Is there something that he's trying to communicate with that particular style, representational style?
Well, I can't speak for C, but I can speculate for sure. My first speculation goes to C's extraordinary thesis painting that he finalized in 2011, which you've probably seen. No One's Wonderland. I can't remember the full title of it, but it was a 20-foot wide painting composed out of 4 canvases. The detailing in that was phenomenal, and you know, I don't know how long C took to create that painting. I remember first seeing it just going, oh my God, C, like, where did this come from? You know, I'd seen a couple of smaller canvases that had this exquisite detailing, lots of information, just a real fine approach that you know, was more akin to illustration. And I remember C saying, oh, Ivar, I never want to do a painting like that again. It took so much time. and I could only laugh and say, well, see, if you did just that, I mean, my God, like, everybody loves this. And you know, no, for C, everything is an exploration and an understanding, not just of what he's after, but maybe also an understanding of contemporary art history, his origins, all sorts of things. And so what I think is interesting is that the works, the fine detail in those works that he's created, you know, most artists, it might take them a few years to produce something like that. C did a lot of that in, like, I don't know, a couple months. And you just go, how is that even possible? When he sent them to me, I was just like, C, like, have you been sitting on these for a while? No, this was just like his experiment at the time. And I think that if we go back to his earliest works and this idea of mark making to create, you know, imagery, and how that's something that artists have been doing over time. There's lots of different ways to approach it. He's very, very quick and very confident, I think, in where he's going as he's sitting down at paper or on canvas. And what I think he's really after with this body of work, Metallic Leaf Garden, is not knowing where the painting is going to go and just diving in and using the knowledge that he's built. And part of it might be a desire to say, I don't, you know, like, this is what I want to do. It's not about these intricately detailed works that he'd been doing for a while and doing very, very successfully. So I really admire him in that. And also just, you know, if we look at how they function within a space like this and how much they change from looking at them close up to looking at them from afar, I think that's very much a sensibility that artists are after achieving, or interested in achieving after a while. Some artists.
I have a second question.
Sure.
Thank you for that answer. Part of C's work that I've seen that we don't see here, he used to do these calligraphic scrolls.
Oh yeah.
You literally roll up and the precision. Is he still doing that? Some of them had graphics in there that were just outright naughty.
Yeah, that's You know,
doing any of that? I was always fascinated by the contrast.
yeah, what I love about C is that he might, like with the gold leaf paintings, he might say, well, I've got like 30 or 4 of these boards that were sent to me from China, so I'm gonna use them, or I've got, you know, reams of paper to work on, I'm gonna use them. I don't think he necessarily thinks directionally so much, like if he's exploring something, particularly the funny paintings, because a lot of those, you know, to me, have a funny characteristic to them that make people laugh or go, oh yeah, those are like, you know, bedroom paintings or whatever. And you go, yeah.
Peeking through curtains or something like
Yeah.
that.
He doesn't want to be known for that, but even within those works, there's a richness of Chinese traditions, Chinese context that nobody necessarily sees. They see the funny parts instead, and that's something that I've loved with the gold leaves is that, you know, through many of them, you would see these elements that relate really just to Chinese traditions in art. And so the scrolls that he was doing, I think he only had a few of those scrolls. I think that you wanted to see like what would happen if he did them. You know, I think the few that we had were picked up for collections, and you just go, he's not necessarily going to just keep doing that. He did, in 2013, we had a major exhibition for C at the McNichol Civic Center down in Denver. And this was after they had finished their early renovation and were using it as an exhibition space. Giant space, like four times the size of this, but certainly not ideal to be working in. And I'm trying to think of where my thought track was going with this. Oh yeah, so as part of that exhibition, we did an on-site demonstration where C was going to show, you know, doing calligraphic work, and he chose to do that on one of the scrolls. And to watch him is to see a master doing that type of work, and it's not work that he chooses to do. He just has a mastery of it that's pretty phenomenal, and to me that's also something that when I look at his detailed works and go, well, yeah, you've got a mastery there too, but you're not choosing to pursue that anymore. So it's the pursuit of something that he's after. And even leading up to Metallic Leaf Garden, he said, well, everything that I've done prior is to get to this point of now.
So, Ivar, this piece here seems very different than the other ones, the intimacy of the characters.
Yes.
Did he do other pieces in that series? Or?
Well, so that's still Metallic Leaf Garden. That is very much an oddball, and the reason why I selected it, partially for scale, but also, you know, it's such a, I don't want to say a different piece. If you turn the corner and you see sort of like a similar representation, but you lose maybe the context. A lot of times C does cycle context, you know, through different paintings in different ways. And I see this also as the relationship to a setting that could be very similar to these other paintings. So I think that the biggest change within it is that it has a greater subtlety to maybe what it's about, and the coloration is very different. I think the white voids are something that, boy, he's done some paintings with negative space that I don't think people quite understand how hard it is to work with that, and how you know, how much he's able to get something through it. So, you know, it's again one of those works that upon installing the exhibition and getting to look at all of these works fresh, I learned so much just from looking at that painting and saying, wow, I'm really glad that we chose it for the show. It also has that you know, I looked at it and said, well, for Childtown, that kind of begins that portion where the imagery shifts a little bit, and I thought that it was a very touching piece in a way that for a wall that is disconnected from the rest, that it could really carry that. So it's called Barbie. Yeah, thanks for asking that question.
You said, you know, this in metallic leaf garden, he's woven in abstraction in ways that didn't exist in his previous bodies of work. How does that show up, or what are you seeing here that makes you say that?
Well, like, you know, you see it in all the paintings, but a section like this is what I really love, where, you know, you step into it, it's just these broad brush strokes that, you know, in any other context could you know, change the feeling or the effect of the work. If we look at this painting here, which is one of my absolute favorites, to sort of talk about that concept, the safety belts. I mean, the work itself was not what I thought it was about. He talked about it at the opening. But if we look at the abstraction here, like this field down here to me is pure abstraction. Throughout the painting, you have what I would call sensibilities of abstraction that I alluded to Alice Neal in the essay, because as I looked at her, you know, revisited her work and started looking at how artists can do that, where it's about a swarm of color in ways that imbue the figure or the composition that I find to be fascinating, and I don't think that that's very easy to do, or you know, that too many artists are qualified to get away with it. So, you know, I think the approach to everything has this idea that the abstract merges with the figurative and with the composition in ways that you know, soften when you remove yourself or back away from them, but they're there when you know, really look at it up close too, in a different way.
Thank you.
Yeah. And if you do look at his early works too, like his way of doing that abstraction within highly detailed figurative works is phenomenal. It's just really phenomenal. So I don't think it's something that, like, when he does say, hey, everything I did before was to get to this point, I think he's really being genuine about that. He's a very humble person too, you know, no ego attached to who he is, what he does at all, and I think that's what, that's a tremendous accolade on his end.
Well, thank you, Ivar, so much. This was an amazing conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
To talk to you and meeting C and hearing him talk about the work is so great to see. You know, I think as an artist, you think one thing about your work, and then having that outside voice who can kind of collect it into a publication, a show. You're seeing lots of things maybe C isn't seeing, and that becomes a dialogue that I think makes the show that much stronger. But thank you all for coming. We'll hang out for a little bit if y'all have more questions, but please hang around and chat with Ivar some more about the work. And thanks for coming to our talk today.
Yeah, thanks for coming.